There are no rules in mixed media except when it comes to how to use a stencil properly. Hello lovely butterfly, welcome back to my channel, it's France. You said a very loud and clear yes when I asked you if you wanted a video on how to use a stencil properly, because many of us, and me included, get so annoyed when the mediums go underneath the stencil when we're actually trying to get a crisp and clean something on what it is we're making. So let's have a closer look at stencils. First of all, to see what it is we're working with, black background. I picked my Harlequin stencil for this little demo. First thing when you're picking a stencil is to look at how it was cut. Is it cut properly? It's okay to have little pieces and bits of plastic still in there, but your stencil, the cut should be clean. And then the thickness of the material that it's cut out. If you have a lot of cutouts like I have on this stencil, you will have something that's a bit more floppier than if you have something like this where there's less cutout. But nonetheless, your stencil should have a minimum of resistance. If your stencil feels like paper, it will act like paper. That doesn't mean that paper stencils are not good, but they need to have a minimum of thickness. Same thing with plastic stencils. Also, if your stencil is thick enough, it will allow you to add more texture, more dimension to what it is you're making. If your stencil is like really flat, you won't be able to add a lot of dimension because your paste that you're using to create the texture will follow the thickness of your stencil. Next up, we need to have a look at how a stencil is actually cut. So if we have a closer look at the cut line, you will see that there's an upside and a downside to a stencil. Now, even like this is still not close enough, so let's magnify. You can see now that on the upside of the stencil, there's a double line. There's like a second little line following the opening. That side is the upside of your stencil. Now, if we turn the stencil around and have a look at what actually is the back side of your stencil, and again, we magnify it, you will see that there is no such line. We have a completely smooth surface, and that is why this has to be the backside of your stencil, because this is the side that can make full contact with the substrate you're working on. This is the side that can lay down completely smooth on your surface. Let's make a little drawing about what it is I'm saying here. So if I'm drawing the opening here, I have the upside of my stencil, the opening, and then the downside. So my stencil here is like an inch thick in my little drawing. So we have the upside and the downside. That is how we think the opening looks. So the medium come in like that. But that is not how it looks. It actually looks beveled. So at the top, that is why you could see that second line, because you could actually see the smooth side from the bottom coming further into the opening. And so your medium come in that way. If you put your stencil upside down with the beveled side this way, you're actually inviting all the products to seep underneath your stencil. That is not what we want. We don't want the mediums to go that way. We want them to go that way and to lay nicely in the opening of our stencil. So yes, your stencil has an upside and a downside. The reason for this has everything to do with the way stencils are cut. I'm not going to get into technicity here. I am going to show you, however, how to recognize the upside and the downside. When you take out a brand new stencil, it doesn't lay flat. It has a hollow side. The hollow side is the back side. It's the side that should be on the substrate you're working on. So I like to mark my new stencils as soon as I get them out of the package, or write their name on them so that I know what it is I'm working with, so that when I want to use a stencil, I don't have to start looking, okay, which side does it go here? If it has any text, of course, it's easy to recognize, but not all stencils have text, and then you have to know how to recognize the upside from the downside. But now you know. But there's more. If you take a closer look, you can actually see that little line with your eyes. You have to look very, very closely, and then you can see it. You can see that the back side is completely smooth. Sometimes the upside is a little bit shinier than the downside, but that's not always the case. My favorite way to use a stencil, if you've looked at any of my videos, you know it's to use molding paste. And then, of course, a good handy palette knife. So now that we know the upside from the downside, the good thing is also to know not to use too much products at once. Go in gently and don't scrape back and forth. Scrape in one direction so that you don't push the product underneath the stencil, and then you get a crisp and neat stenciling. The second thing is the clean stencils. That's the not so fun part. Unfortunately, that needs to be done too. I don't like to run around, so I like to stay where I'm working. So I just use baby wipes with my flat hand and then just wiping it all off. But don't forget to clean the back side as well, because a not clean stencil will not work properly. Some people like to have a container with water next to them and will just drop all their stencils in there and then clean them at the end when they're done in the sink. But don't forget that all these mediums might clog up your sink, so be careful with that. So if a stencil is not clean, you will get like all this residue on the backside of your stencil, and that will actually create some kind of bevel. So it will invite, as I showed previously on the little drawing, it will invite all the mediums to just go underneath the stencil instead of just staying in between the opening. The same applies to masks. So if you want to put down your mask in the correct way on your surface, you need to look at it just like you would look at a stencil. The edge has the same kind of double line on the upside and a flat, smooth surface on the bottom. And if you're wondering what that little opening is in the middle of my masks, it's to stick them down with washi tape. This way, while you're working, they will stay in place. And talking about tape, let's get into some technique fun here. I want to spray some ink, and to make sure that my ink isn't going everywhere, I'm just using some tape. First, I'm spraying on some water and then some Lindy's. Now, this is just a very general use of stencils, but of course you can take this a step further. If you want to heat set this, be careful. Stencils melt. Yes, they do. I'm not really drying it. I just want to make sure that the ink that's on the paper doesn't go anywhere, because I want to lift the stencil and of course reuse all the ink that I have on there. So I'm actually going to use my stencil as a stamp, just using all the ink that is staying on the stencil. And that will give me a very interesting print. I really love this technique. Wait for the reveal. There we go. I actually did a Journal on Monday video like that. I'll put the link in the description of this video to this video, where that's exactly what I used as technique. Now, let's move on to another fun little technique to do with our stencils. This time we're going to play with a reductive technique. So I already have some color on my little piece of paper, and I use Distress inks because I need a water reactive something. Now that I know that I have my stencil in the right direction, because apparently I forgot to mark this one, I know which side needs to go up. I can start with some water because I need to reactivate the ink. I'm letting it to sit there for a second, and then I'm lifting that water again just using a piece of kitchen wool, and that will just lift the color of the distress ink with the water. This is a very soft and gentle way to create an effect. We can do that same reductive technique with a bit more drama to it, but first I need to heat set this. Now that it's dry, I can go back in with the stencil. I'm placing it in the exact same place, but this time, instead of spraying the water on, I'm going in with a baby wipe. This way, not only am I reactivating the ink with the moist of the baby wipe, I'm also, well, by rubbing the water in there, I'm really forcing the color to react to it. When doing this, of course, you have to be careful not to push all the color underneath your stencil because you are working with something that is wet. So before lifting it, again, I'm drying it slightly and then I'm lifting the stencil. And now there's really something going on here. I did heat set that before going in with a next little something. It is also something that I like to do with stencils, but it's not that easy actually, especially if you have, well, quality stencils that have a bit of dimension to them, and that is to use the stencil to stamp in a certain shape. To do that, of course, I need to mask off all the little things that I don't want to be stamped, so that when I go in with my little stamp, I only stamp in that little heart shape. And the reason it's so hard, it's, well, you have an opening in which you want to stamp. So obviously the stamping is not going to go all the way to the edge, but there is a way around to cheat for that. To make it actually look recognizable, once you have lifted your stencil, you can go in with a marker or a fine liner or whatever it is your heart fancies, and then you can doodle around the shape in the shape that you actually used as your stencil. And now I have stamping in the shape of a little heart. Another thing I like to do is to go in with gesso or white paint over a stencil. Now, if you want to do this, don't overload your sponge. Don't go from your paint straight into what it is you want to stencil. Make sure that you dab it a couple of times so that you only have like that amount of paint on your sponge that you actually need. Otherwise, by dabbing the sponge down, you're actually going to push all the medium underneath the stencil. And we don't want that. We want some clean stuff here. Unless you want some smudging. That is all up to you. I added some more of that white paint with a sponge. I added some black molding paste over the Driving Me Circle stencil. And now I'm just sticking down one of my stamps that I cut out. And I'm adding some more stamping here and there. Basically, I'm finishing off the little card. Et voila, now stenciling has no more secrets for you. These are all the stencils that I used for this little card. I'll list them in the description of this video. I hope you liked today's video. If so, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit the little bell to receive notifications of new videos. I'll be back here next Saturday live for a new A Layer a Day challenge prompt. Next Monday for a new Channel on Monday video. A huge thank you to my butterfly patrons. Don't forget to put down a layer a day. Butterfly kisses.